I've always been fond of making knitted jewellery, and these are some of the ones I wear when teaching appropriate workshops. So the socks, that one is a top down with a Latvian twist, common heel and a wedge toe. This one is toe up with a garter stitch short row heel and bi-coloured bind off. This one is when I was doing knitted chain mail, which is grafted I-cords. I decided it would make a lovely necklace, and there are the matching earrings. This is a tiny double knit blanket. I will admit casting on was a little bit fiddly, and beautiful double knit earrings knit for me with happy stitches on them. They were knit by my daughter. And a single domino square worn as a pendant. Having filmed the two previous YouTube clips on how to make a nice stuffed bubble, it turned my mind to thinking that this would also make a very nice necklace. And this one, I ran the yarns continuously, so I knit my I-cord around my bobble yarn. I'll film that in the next video. And this one I did something similar, but with a two-coloured I-cord. And I arranged my beads in a pattern format. So we'll get to those later. The simplest thing to do, though, is to work with one yarn. This is some yarn from Biscot and C, and as you can see, it has very distinct areas of colour. So this is going to be a multi-loop necklace, and I've made a few modifications since the filming of the hat bobble to give slightly better coverage at the bottom of the bobble where the bobble is started. So I'll show you the process. I began with a few rounds of contrasting waste yarn so that I can make a perfect join when I attach the end to the beginning. There is another video on how to perfectly graft I-cord. I'll put a link to it in the notes. So having begun there, I'm working my way along, and let's look at how we make a bobble. I did only do a couple of rows of plain I-cord after the beginning because I've discovered that it's easier to hide the ends if you're somewhere near a bobble rather than in the middle of the length of I-cord. I've put 8 rounds of I-cord between each of the bobbles, but these could be varied as well. So I'm ready for my next bobble, counting from the previous bobble. That's the decrease stitch, 2, 4, 6, 8 on the needle. I've changed the increase slightly to a knit one, yarn over, and then knit through back loop. This gives a little bump, and I wouldn't do this if I was doing stocking stitch, but going into garter stitch, I find it disguises the hole that sometimes appears when you just do the straight knit one, yarn over, knit one. I'll do it again. So into the stitch, knit, yarn over, and then knit through back loop of what's left of the stitch. It does make a little visible bump, but since we're going into reverse stocking stitch, this will blend in nicely. And these are the little holes that it kind of disguises. So I think it's a little bit neater. You see I've got a little bit of stuffing peeping through there. So I do the first 2 increases onto one needle, and then the second 2 increases onto the second needle. Knit, yarn over, and through back loops. Leaves me with the first 6 on one needle, the second 6 on the other. So I fold them round to a position where I can put them into double knit format. Because I'm going to be working this in reverse stocking stitch, I want my far stitch first. So I'm going to take my far, my near, far, near, and so on until I've got all 12 stitches on my right hand needle. Having rearranged the stitches we can now double knit 5 rounds or 10 passes to create the tube that forms the bobble. Because the first stitch on the needle belongs to the far layer, I can go into both at once and purl, letting the far stitch drop off. It might be easier on the first round just to slip and purl, but as soon as there's a little bit of give, they can be worked as sort of one unit. So I'm slipping the far layer and purling the near layer. This first row can be a bit fiddly. And because we began with a slipped far stitch, we must always end with a worked near stitch. After the first 2 passes, this becomes easier as the stitches are more relaxed. And I choose to work them by putting the needle into both the one to be slipped and the one to be purled, and letting the one to be slipped drop off. This is what I call slip purling, and it's actually quite fun to do. It takes a little training to get the muscles in your left hand to withdraw that left needle. Reverse stocking stitch is more efficient than stocking stitch anyway, because we don't have to keep moving the yarn out of the way of the other layer. I'm going to keep going until I've completed 5 rounds. If you're being particular about the size of your bobbles, then it pays to count them before you finish this, because it's easy to lose track. So that is one of the increase stitches. So that's round 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5th one is on the needle. And remember to check the other side too. Once your bobble is long enough, and of course they could all be different lengths, or you could do a pattern of different lengths, then take 2 receiving needles and put the needles into the stitches, far, near, trying not to split the plies. It's easier when you're not trying to film it at the same time. Or you could just do this. Now we're ready to stuff. We can now open and access the inside of our tube, and I cut a whole bunch of little pieces of quilt batting ahead of time, and I just crumple them up into something approximating a ball and tuck it inside. Now we're going to take this back to 4 stitches, ready for I-cord again. I think it helps to have fine tipped needles to work this chain, but they're also more prone to splitting your plies. So I've slipped 1 knitwise, knit 2 together, across the first needle and pass slip stitch over. So that's 3 stitches become 1, and repeating that around first the first needle, then the second. There are my 4 remaining stitches that are now going to become I-cord again, and simply fold them onto 1 needle with your yarn at the left edge. we go. There's the yarn coming from the last decrease, and now I can go back to making a length of I-cord. And I'm going to continue until I get back to the same colour at this end, so it will look virtually invisible, and then I'll graft the beginning to the end.